mentioned kingdom money principles. Like, how do you help entrepreneurs think about money?
Yeah. So when we talk about the kingdom money principles, I've broken it down into really four principles. The principle of ownership, as I mentioned, God owns everything, and it's we're simply managers. So the
Mm,
principle of stewardship, and if we are knowing that as stewardship, you can go back to the parable of talents. Like when we manage something, like when you give your money to a money manager, you give that to them with the expectation of a return on your
right.
investment,
Yeah.
right? So the uh three servants in that parable of the talents, it's like, yeah, well, who which one was called wicked and lazy? It was the one that actually did nothing with it.
Mm,
They buried it for fear, out of their perception of of the master, which I think that's a big component of that, is because I think our thought process and our relationship to money is directly in correlation to our how we view God and our relationship with God. Because if you read that parable, it clearly says, I knew you to be a hard man. And it's like, man, that was his perception. It was that he's going to come back. I better not lose anything. So it was
mhm.
operating out of fear, not putting money to use, in which the other two actually doubled the money that they had been given. So they used it, they went to the marketplace, they traded it, or whatever they did to acquire more, to actually provide that as when the master actually returned. And so I think there's three things that come down to that: is God gives to us according to our ability. That's what that parable says. And I believe our ability is based upon three things: the availability that we make ourselves, right? Are we going to make ourselves available to God? The second thing would be the responsibility that we're willing to take on, right? Are we going to be responsible with what we've been given? And we've all heard this and read it. Like, if we're responsible with the little that we have, God will
Mhm.
bless us with more.
Yeah.
And then ultimately the accountability that we're willing to endure, because we know the master's returning at some point. And I want to make sure that what I've been given, that I've stewarded it well, I've grown it, I've multiplied it, so I can be have him look down at me one day and say, well done, good and faithful servant. And so that's the understanding of what that management or stewardship is. And then the last two principles that we coach on would be the principle of worship, right? Which essentially is tithing. I believe,
Mhm.
first off, anything that we do in our work is a form of worship. Hey, work is not a curse. Work was created before the fall of man. It was still, when we did sin. Now it was like, because of that, we are going to toil and by the sweat of our brow. But work was created before that took place. So I believe the original intent that God had for work was to be a form of worship, and how we're and so if we have that heart's disposition, thankfully Christ redeemed us, in that we can still come to that, if we've given our life to Christ, that we can now have that approach of that I'm working for the Lord in everything that I do. And part of that then is going to be, I'm working to tithe. And I never have an income goal without first having a giving goal. And I think if entrepreneurs took that into stride and understood what that actually meant, it's like, I'm not just acquiring wealth to acquire wealth or to provide a better life for my family. Sure, that could be a byproduct, but it's only because of the what I'm able to give and what I'm able to do above and beyond, which is that fourth principle, which we consider kingship, and just understanding the law of sowing and reaping. And yes, it is a law. There's so many principles within the word of God that if we would just get under them and operate within them, they work every single time. They
Mhm.
work. And it's just, unfortunately, the Christian community, I believe, has been blinded by just understanding and living in this idea that it is more virtuous to be in poverty than it is to actually have money. It's God that gives us that ability to create that wealth, no doubt about it. But from there, then obviously it's what we do with it that is the defining factor, and whether that money actually has us or we have money. And everything obviously comes down to that heart's disposition towards it. And that's really the accountability factor that we coach and teach on within the King's Council, to make sure that people are stewarding it appropriately.